Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 16. The Senator for Labor and Appropriations thumped his fists on the table, the sound of the impact on the 300-year-old oak table carrying easily to those seated in the vast chamber around it. Surrender must be an option. If we are faced with total defeat, we would be unutterably foolish not to at least try to seek terms which would in the very least ensure the survival of the human race. The UEL chairman could barely hide his disgust as he saw several of the other senators nodding in agreement. Their fear built upon lives led in comfort and without real danger, adding to the speed with which their minds eagerly grasped at even the smallest chance for absolution. Surrender or negotiation with the Deimos after they attacked has never been and will never be a policy of this government. You, sir, are a coward. Better to be a smart coward than a brave fool, Mr. Chairman. From a viewing platform high above the main hall, General Jacob de Veers watched the full session of the UEL High Council. The debate, heated from the beginning, was now reaching a boiling point, de Veers noting the subtle tension in the Pathfinder honor guards present, the guards ready to use force to restore order if the debate reached open violence. Even as he watched the debate, the flow of information coming to him was continuous, report after report, a litany of news, mostly bad. As soon as he had cleared the information and edited it, he handed it over to his attaché, who handed it to the High Council's intelligence branch representative, who in turn presented it to the council. Despite his efforts to control the flow of information, de Veers knew that it was the recent spate of unavoidable bad news that had pushed the council to the edge of crisis. The Deimos had successfully penetrated the orbital defenses at several locations around the planet and landed ground forces in strength. In all but 2 of the landing zones, the Deimos had made significant progress and captured large amounts of territory. Despite the huge effort put into expanding the UEA, activating regional defense reserve units, and building fortifications, the UEA was stretched to breaking point, with virtually all forces, including designated reserve formations, now committed to the fight. The problem was made worse by the situation in space, where the fleet's inability to limit the Deimos's mobility meant that large numbers of first-line formations had to remain in place to guard against further landings and could play little or no part in containing those already underway. With the situation on the ground critical, the Council had been thrown in turmoil by the latest report from the fleet that detailed not only an alarmingly long list of losses, but also that the UEF Command had ordered a general withdrawal to UEF Lunar to reform, refit, and rearm before resuming operations against the Deimos armada that still surrounded Earth. To those of a military background, a significant minority within the Council, the move had been greeted with understanding. The fleet had, after all, been engaged in heavy fighting for almost 24 hours, and the move made both practical and military sense. But a significant portion of the chamber greeted the news with shock and even recriminations of cowardice, a charge angrily denied by the Council's UEF representative. As the debate continued to ebb and flow in the chamber, the split in the Council that had reared its head at the beginning of the crisis began to re-emerge, with the hawkish elements supporting the chairman and the more dovish rallying behind the Senator for Labor and Appropriations. A full split and constitutional crisis had only been narrowly averted previously, but de Veers could see little hope in avoiding it this time. It was fast coming to a head, and nothing could prevent it. De Veers felt a strange sensation, something he had not felt in some time, trepidation, rising in him as he saw the pieces falling into place. And for once in his life, he had little or no idea what was going to happen. In a deft political move, the Senator for Labor and Appropriations fired the first shot and, in a surprise move, invoked a rarely used article that allowed for the censure and emergency replacement of the UEL chairman during a time of crisis due to incapacity or incompetence. De Veers sat forward in his seat as the chant of "Vote now! Vote now!" filled the chamber, the voices echoing as senators who supported the chairman rose to their feet and hurled abuse and papers at those who were calling for the vote. The High Council magistrate tried desperately to regain order, but her voice was lost in the torrent of abuse and counter-abuse. Amongst the chaos, de Veers noticed a change in the chairman. A calm had come over him. He had reached a decision. A statue in the storm of motion, the chairman stood up and waited. The chamber slowly grew quiet as the senators saw that the head of the UEL government had something to say. After a few minutes, silence filled the chamber, all faces on the chairman, who in a level voice began to speak. I took this office knowing the great responsibilities that came with it. I took it knowing that we faced a threat unlike any other, and that it would take hard decisions and courage to steer our league and our world through the times ahead. The Senator for Labor and Appropriations leaned forward, hanging on every word, waiting for the chairman to utter the words that would see him forced to step down. I took up this office with a sacred oath to serve the best interests of humanity, no matter the cost. He turned and stared directly at the Senator for Labor and Appropriations, who was seated almost directly opposite. I did not take on this great burden to see this world fall due to the cowardice of some in its leadership when countless brave men and women are fighting and dying to preserve their freedom. The senator recoiled as if he had been physically struck, shock and surprise showing on his face. This war will end when the Deimos home world lies in ashes. We will stay the course, and have no doubt we will win the day. We will then carry this war forth against this evil into the very stars from whence it came. The chairman's voice had become cold, almost brittle, nothing but an icy breeze transmitting through his words. Guards! Around the chamber at the various access doors, the Pathfinder guards brought their weapons up to their chests with a stomp of one of their armored feet, the crash resounding around the chamber. Detain the senator. There was total shock around the chamber, and for a moment no one moved. Then from an unnoticed corner movement drew everyone's attention. Down the steps towards the chamber floor came the forbidding figure of a Praetorian battle commander, looking all the more formidable in full combat uniform complete with slung ASBR 103, several battle citations glinting on his chest armor. The chamber seemed frozen in time as the hulking armored warrior walked slowly down, his footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. De Veers was as shocked and unprepared as anyone at the action of the Ten's representative, something that had no precedent. Suddenly, a Pathfinder guard broke his vigil by one of the chamber's doors and began to walk down the steps towards the Praetorian. They met halfway down the steps towards the chamber floor and for a moment stared at each other, everyone holding their breath. Then, to add to the chamber's shock, the Pathfinder fell in alongside the Praetorian, and together they headed towards the chairman's podium. Once they reached the podium, both snapped to attention, and as one saluted the chairman, who returned the salute crisply. The chairman then pointed at the stunned Senator for Labor and Appropriations, who looked like he was choking. Detain that man and remove him from this chamber. He is unfit for service and stains the honor of the chamber with his presence. The two armored soldiers turned just as the senator found his voice and began to protest. The chairman cut him off, and if he resists, you have my permission and authority to shoot him. There was an audible snap as both soldiers cocked their ASBRs, their deadly intent and determination undeniably clear to the hundreds of senators seated around them. The senator looked around desperately for support, but few met his eyes, and his shoulders sank in final resignation as he realized that he had lost the gamble. De Veers watched the whole exchange with a mixture of surprise and contemplation, the realization that a defining political event had just occurred far from escaping the general's mind. As he watched closely, the two soldiers escorted the broken senator for Labor and Appropriations from the chamber. As they passed the chairman's podium, De Veers' keen eyes saw the slightest inclination of the chairman's head toward the Praetorian, the gesture going seemingly unnoticed by the others in the chamber, who were all fixated on the pair of soldiers and their prisoner. De Veers' mind went into overdrive. Had the chairman anticipated that this would occur and been in collusion with the Praetorian officer? The possibility was a revelation, and De Veers was both stunned and impressed. If it was true, the UEL chairman was a far more astute political operator than even De Veers had given him credit for. The more De Veers thought about it, the more sense it made, and the more impressed he became in the sheer simplicity and cunning of the chairman's plan. The chairman had seen the crisis coming from a long way off and had carefully ensured that it had been brought to a head in the chamber at that moment, effectively ambushing his biggest political rival with a skill that De Veers had seldom seen. The role of the Praetorian in the senator's fall from power had been a work of carefully crafted showmanship. By taking part in the action, the Praetorian had in one stroke shown in a symbolic gesture that the 10 both supported the chairman's leadership and that they would settle for nothing less than total victory. The show of force would also serve as a warning that political cowardice would not be tolerated by the military and that they would take action, if need be, to ensure stability. De Vere sat back, the chairman's strategy suddenly so clear, a slight degree of annoyance creeping in that he had not seen it earlier. De Vere's was also surprised that he had not been included in the chairman's plan. De Vere's mulled it over. He had been sure that he had the man's full confidence, and yet he had been left out of the scheme. More than likely, he decided it was a condition of getting the cooperation of the 10, their distrust of the intelligence branch well known. Well, thought De Vere's, I will have to keep a much closer eye on this one. De Vere's looked at the chairman as if seeing him for the first time, scrutinizing every detail, a much closer eye. The first rays of a new dawn found Stalker, Link, D, and their escort arriving at the headquarters of the 7th Armored Cavalry Division, located at Budenheim on the bend of the Rhine River about 6 kilometers northwest of the center of Mainz. There was a relative calm in the dawn. A slight breeze was blowing, and it smelled fresh and clean, the gray clouds and misty rain that had set in during the night clearing. With the 2nd Terra Nova's regimental staff busy, liaising with their opposed number in the 7th Armored Cavalry and the regiment's company's still arriving Stalker, Big D and Link were escorted in the divisional HQ located inside an abandoned cafe. As he walked through the door behind Big D, Stalker took one last look at the street outside. The street was narrow and flanked by double-story buildings with red-tiled roofs, the red tiles matching the red pavers that covered the street. Here, and there were dotted trees and shrubs built into the footpath, the larger trees sporting rest benches for people to take advantage of their abundant shade. There were, however, none of the usual eager tourists or relaxed locals strolling the streets that day. Instead, under the shade of the leafy trees was parked a long line of armored vehicles and heavily armed soldiers sporting woodland-patterned camouflage standard battle armor. Inside the cafe, their escorting USOC commando led them past a group of officers, a mixture of armored cavalry, Regional Defense Reserve, RDR, and USOC personnel. Stepping over several cables that ran across the floor to portable terminals and holographic emitters, the group passed through to the rear of the building. Standing around a table in the enclosed rear courtyard were 2 senior officers, their backs to the new arrivals. One was a broad-shouldered general wearing the cross sabers insignia of the cavalry, and a brigadier general who wore the black uniform of the USOC and insignia of the 14th Commando Regiment. The escorting commando promptly presented himself to his CEO, and the pair of generals turned to face the new arrivals. The Special Forces officer greeted Big D first, but it was the other man that drew Stalker's attention. He was an imposing-looking man with high cheekbones, a dark complexion, and an Asiatic face. Stalker recognized him instantly, his features unmistakable even without the stenciled name on his uniform that read Sukbitar. Big D introduced Stalker and Link to the pair, Stalker shaking the hand of the USOC commander first. Brigadier General Steve Murray, a man in his mid-40s with an unmistakable air of casual confidence about him and brown eyes that sparkled with a hint of larrikinism. Stalker liked the man on instinct, his easy manner appealing to Stalker's more casual command style. The commanding general of the 7th Armored Cavalry extended his hand, showing no sign of recognition. Stalker speaking first. Glad to meet you again, sir. Or should I call you Hero of the Axe? Stalker saw a smile break across the general's face. I thought it was you. It is not every day you see a Terra Nova battle commander wearing a presentation sword. Stalker glanced at the black scabbard that swung lazily from his hip, and it is also not every day you meet a general whose family rode with the great Khan of the Silver People. Sukbitar beamed at Stalker's use of the traditional name of the Mongol people. You do me much honor, specialist. I see you have moved up in the world since we last met. It seems we both have general. I now command a company, and you command your entire division. Sukbitar quickly greeted Link, and group exchanged friendly banter, for a few more minutes before switching to business. Supatar ushered them around a large old-fashioned paper map that he had spread out on the table, the document weighed down by a pistol and a 50mm grenade. On the map were scribbled various notes and unit numbers, as well as arrows showering the lines of Deimos' advance toward Mainz. The Deimos have pushed to within 10 kilometers of the city's outskirts, and we have, as yet, been unable to halt their advance. For the moment, they appear to have paused to regroup before assaulting the city directly. The front line has been relatively quiet for the last 2 hours. Murray stepped forward and motioned to the map. My forward observers have been attached to the Cav scouts operating along the front. They report heavy enemy forces building up opposite Harksheim and Elsheim further north here. Murray pointed out the 2 areas on the map. Stalker quickly saw the Deimos' strategy. The 2 urban centers represented the last obstacle before the relatively open ground that ran right up to the outskirts of Mainz. Once they pushed aside the forces in front of them, there would be no real opportunity to slow or halt their advance until it reached the city itself. Big D took one look at it and came to the same conclusion. What's the estimated strength and composition of the Opfer? Supatar answered, so far, we have seen heavily armored formations well supported by infantry and artillery. They have been bypassing most defended centers and leaving them to be mopped up by artillery and following infantry units. There are also heavy mecha formations in the field, which are acting as the Deimos' main counterstrike force. Whenever my cavalry troops have tried to engage and stop the armored spearheads in open ground, the Deimos mecha, in combination with determined use of tactical air power, have outmaneuvered and outgunned them. Make no mistake, gentlemen, their mecha are lethal, and I do mean lethal. There was a moment's silence before Link spoke up. What's the status of our forces? If either of the generals minded Link intervening in the conversation, none of them showed it. Supatar swung the map around slightly so Link could see it better. Of my 3 operational maneuver battalions, OMBs, 2 have been in constant action since engaging the enemy yesterday, along with elements of my Mobile Support Battalion, MSB. Their losses have been in excess of 50% in equipment and about 40% in personnel. My 3rd OMB I have kept in tactical reserve, and their losses have been light, mostly from airstrikes and artillery fire. Supatar took a breath, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. The 45th Infantry and several Regional Defense Reserve battalions took the brunt of the initial landings, their efforts giving us the time to mobilize and deploy for action. A few scattered elements of the 45th and the RDR have managed to join with our lines. But from our latest intelligence, it appears that we are looking at virtually a total loss of these formations. Despite the gravity of the news that tens of thousands of lives have been lost and a division annihilated, Supatar kept his voice businesslike. General Murray, if you would. Murray leaned forward and examined the map. As you can see, the front line is no longer tenable, and with this in mind, I have deployed the bulk of the 14th in the city alongside General Supatar's reserve OMB and RDR forces. The urban environment will limit the Deimos' mobility and force their infantry out of their vehicles. It will also hopefully inhibit the movement of their mecha formations and maybe even give us the opportunity to take a few of them down. What do you think, Assault Commander? Big D thought for a moment. The terrain of the city itself is our best asset and creates special problems for mecha, problems that we need to take full advantage of. The Striders of the 10 train specifically to operate in urban terrain, but mecha are far larger and are better suited to open country. At your request, the 2nd Terra Nova is currently deploying in the city alongside your operators and the Cav, while the rest of the division will follow as soon as possible. The Deimos will try to punch through to the river and secure a line along it. D frowned for a moment. We will have the river to our backs, so if we stay, we fight. D looked around and saw no disagreement in the faces of the men around him. I recommend we form a defense in depth. If we form several lines along a northwest-southeast axis, say along these major roads. D indicated a number of roads that ran roughly parallel to the river through the city. If we form up in strength along these roads, and then collapse back when necessary to the next line. We will blunt the momentum of the enemy. In this way, each time we fall back, our lines will condense and get stronger, while the Deimos will meet a continuously increasing level of resistance as their strength is decreased through attrition. Murray spoke up. Simple and clear specialist. I like it. I would also like to integrate our forces as much as possible to take advantage of each force's skills and equipment. Sukbatar, the ranking officer in the room, nodded in agreement. We fight together then, gentlemen. Good luck. May the spirits of our ancestors be with us. What is, and what is shall be. Stalker and Link jumped down off the iron hide, which barely slowed as it slewed around a corner, its tracks rattling noisily on the paved road. En route to Mainz, news had come in that the 1st and 3rd Terra Nova had begun to arrive and were beginning to deploy. More ominously, artillery fire at the front was also increasing. Stalker looked around, a little bit embarrassed that he didn't know where his own CP was, but Link spied the company electronics technician in a second-story window, Jean waving them up. As he entered the building, Stalker quickly scanned the nearby street and immediately approved of the choice of CP. The building was the 3rd tallest in the street, and as such still gave a good view of the surrounding city, while hopefully not being easily singled out as an obvious choice for an observation position, or OP. Stalker quickly got a status report from the men in his CCU, and, as he had expected, he was not disappointed with the work they had done in his absence. The company was well placed in good cover. The units integrated with several units of commandos, some RDR platoons, and a part of an armored cavalry troop that had been assigned to the area. The 21st Terra Nova had been assigned to the 3rd of 5 rapidly establishing phase lines, the 5th line being the banks of the Rhine itself. Stalker peered out of the window. Concealed along the length of the street were several armored vehicles. The squat shapes of tanks were visible, covering intersections, while from between buildings, iron hides, a few scattered Wasp anti-tank vehicles, and prowlers covered by camouflage netting waited. Stalker was also surprised to see something very different in the street. From a garage door under a double-story house protruded a long barrel. The barrel was connected to a specially modified prowler, the 8-wheeled armored recon vehicle, now mounting a single long railgun in an ungainly-looking automated turret in place of its usual 6-barreled cannon. Stalker saw that the garage ran completely under the building and back onto the next street over, allowing the modified prowler to reverse quickly out of harm's way. Jin saw Stalker looking at it and knelt down alongside Stalker. It's an ugly duckling, isn't it, boss? Certainly, is Jun. I can't recall ever seeing anything quite like it before. I went and chatted to the Cav guys when they moved in. Apparently, it's still a prototype, but they rushed it into production. The railgun is a smaller unit than those carried by Mecha, and they're still having problems with the power pack and cooling systems, so she's limited to a shot every few minutes. Makes sense. Despite being more compact, railguns use a lot more power than plasma weapons or ion-based cannons and have greater problems with heat dispersion. They work fine in space due to the cooler temperatures and size of warship reactors, but as far as I can recall, they haven't proved very successful in armored vehicles smaller than Mecha and Goliaths. Jin nodded in agreement. Still, doesn't look like R&D, research and development, have given up. Maybe they didn't like being outshined by the Deimos with their fancy hover tanks. Stalker was about to reply when the TAC net suddenly came life in his ear. Dee's voice coming over the net loud and clear. Sunray 2 to all units. Whirlwind. Say again, whirlwind. Stalker tensed slightly on reflex as he immediately recognized the code word. The Deimos had resumed their offensive and broken through the cavalry screen. There was now nothing between them and the first defense line. Alpha 2-1 to all units. Switch to individual. Say again, switch to individual. At Stalker's order, the units in the 21st Terra Nova all adjusted their net frequencies to a unit-specific setting. This allowed them to communicate freely on their own frequency with other members of their unit without tying up the company net, while still allowing them to receive communications from Stalkers and the CCU's command spec EEA. The function being designed to allow small units unlimited tactical level communications, including in voice-activated mode, In urban or other low-visibility combat situations where close integration and teamwork was vital to situational awareness and successful operations. Jean gave Stalker a nod, and after quickly double-checking his frequency, headed down into the street, take a position with one of the units, the rest of the CCU already beginning to disperse, only Link staying close. Stalker didn't even have to look to know that Link was there. The man was as reliable as the dawn. Well, Link, what do you think? How long have we got? Not long, boss. The first phase line is only a series of spoiling positions on the edge of the city to break up and slow the Deimos advance. Once they are seriously pressed, they will withdraw. The second line will tell the tale of this story. Stalker considered Link's take on the situation, but could find no fault in his logic, and that second line is only about a kilometer from here. Once the second line goes, we won't have much warning. Link smoothly unslung his Eliminator AMR, and his shouldering it peered into the distance. The edge of the city, several kilometers away, proving too distant to see any real detail. Link was about to put down his rifle when suddenly bright flashes ripped across the horizon from one end to the other. Artillery hitting the outskirts, boss. Just as the words left Link's mouth, the distant rumble was picked up by both their EEA helmet's acoustic sensors. As Link watched, there were 3 further waves of strikes, then nothing. Link wasn't fooled. One thing the Deimos had demonstrated time and time again was their consummate skill in the art of war. The Deimos guns were laying off so as not to cause so much destruction that the rubble and ruins would not impede their forces' advance. The lull also allowed the guns to be ready for instant supporting fire if requested by the leading units. Link looked at his friend. Even in his full-body EA, he could tell Stalker was feeling the pressure. The weeks of unrelenting pressure and the lack of word from Zoe since the attack, combined with the burden of command, was enough to wear down even the best. Still, Stalker had never let him or the men down, and he had complete confidence in him and his command. They were all tired, but any prospect of rest or relief seemed more distant than ever. Hey, boss, I could sure use a beer about now. Stalker turned, some of the stiffness disappearing from his shoulders. Yeah, Link, I've heard the local drop isn't too bad around here either. I'll tell you what, when this is over, you, me, Janet, and Zoe should go for a weekend at one of the local villas and sample some. My treat. Deal. As the minutes ticked by, everyone waited, the air itself seeming to thicken and slow down the passage of time itself. Then, without warning, the hammer blow landed. The message came over the TAC net that the first line had made contact, dark smudges of smoke beginning to appear on the horizon. From his position in the second-story window, Link could still make out no detail, although several clusters of bright flashes marked the concentrated impacts of targeted artillery strikes along the front. All too soon, the withdrawal code came over the TAC net, the first defensive line withdrawing to join the second deeper within the city. There were several minutes of relative quiet, then the heavy blast of an explosion came from somewhere up ahead the distance, the noise sounding alarmingly close as it broke the relative quiet. Immediately following the heavy explosion, the sound of combat erupted all across the city, starting close and then gradually extending away towards the northwest. The air was filled with pops, zings, rattles, crumps, and a myriad of different sounds made by weapons firing and the impact of their ordnance, the combined tune of sound that all veteran soldiers recognized as the soundtrack of war. The battle raged furiously. Link guessed it was just a few kilometers away, the details still hidden from sight below the level of the dense buildings. Smoke rose thick and dark from several spots, and occasional bursts of fire arced above the sea of red and brown-tiled roofs. Without warning, artillery strikes crashed to earth at several locations. The fire concentrated to such an extent that it was virtually impossible to count the number of impacts, the flashes merging into one long blast and sending clouds of gray dust billowing skyward, the shock waves from the impacts rattling nearby windows. There was a loud boom as a Delta-winged Deimos fighter blasted low and fast overhead, before with amazing agility it suddenly pulled upward and went vertical, showing its blue engine exhaust to the surprised soldiers on the ground. 2 columns of tracers from behind the line rose to meet it. Link saw the aircraft's pilot react, and begin to roll, but it was too late, the sleek-looking craft plowing straight into the dual streams. The impact of the heavy cannon rounds scissored through both wings, tearing them off the fuselage. As its wings and flight control surfaces were torn off, the aircraft ceased being an aircraft and became an unguided missile, the wreck plummeting to Earth some distance behind the line with a ground-shaking impact. After what felt like a surprisingly short time, the call came over the TAC net. The second line was withdrawing. Stalker turned to Link. "Good luck. I'll see you on the flip side." "Roger that, boss." As Link settled in behind his eliminator in the window, Stalker left the building and stepped out onto the street below. From street level, the now sporadic noise of firing was seen to be coming from all directions, the echoing nature of the urban terrain often proving a disorientating phenomenon for the inexperienced. Stalker, however, wasn't fazed by the seemingly random noise. One thing being certain, the sounds of battle were getting closer. Incoming. Stalker didn't know who called out, but just had time to drop before the first shells began to land. The plasma shells fell with a bright flash. Several buildings in the street were hit almost instantaneously, chunks of brick and metal debris raining down. Then just as fast as it had arrived, the artillery barrage rolled on as the guns shifted to targets further back. All at once along the length of the front, there was a rush of movement as the withdrawing UEDF forces began to pour back across the new defense line. At the intersections at either end of the street, Stalker saw vehicles roar through at high speed, some of the APCs and IFVs pulling over to disperse their passengers before pulling back to try to find a good position from which they could provide overwatch, the rest deploying further back into the next few streets to add depth to the defenses. An Ironhide slid to a halt close by, and Stalker jogged to meet the passengers as they spilled out onto the street, dragging their weapons and equipment with them. They were cavalry troopers, and they quickly dispersed into the surrounding buildings. Stalker grabbed the corporal, who looked like he was in command of the platoon. "What's the situation, Corporal?" "They're coming specialists, that's the situation. We got swamped by armor and infantry and couldn't hold them. They drove us out one building at a time, hundreds of the bastards." The man broke Stalker's grip and ran after his men, who were rapidly setting up firing positions. Stalker let him go and instead headed over to a unit of his Terra Nova, who were positioned along a garden wall of a house alongside a team of USAC commandos. Just as Stalker reached them, there was a burst of automatic fire from further down the street, and red energy fire began to whip across the street between houses. There was a loud crack as a Devastator tank fired, followed by an explosion of masonry and the sound of breaking glass, which echoed amongst a steadily increasing volume of small arms fire. With a low, deep ripping sound, a Prowler opened fire. A long burst of tracers whipped across one of the intersections at a target Stalker couldn't see. In response, a rocket streaked back the other way and narrowly missed the Prowler. Rubble from the damaged building collapsing onto the Prowler, which fired another burst before reversing out of sight. Then all at once a wave of Deimos flooded into the area. Stalker shot the first Deimos he saw as it came around the side of a building, the 12mm explosive smart round spinning the lanky alien around, a spray of yellow-green liquid marking the impulse warhead's detonation. Firing erupted and continued at a feverish pace as more and more Deimos pushed forward. Deimos armor charged the intersections and was met by a withering hail of missile and cannon fire. An Ironhide launched 2 corkscrew missiles which impacted a slider and then was immediately skewered by a rail shot from a gravity tank. A mess of smoking, burning vehicles filling the intersections as everywhere battle raged with white-hot intensity. Stalker squeezed off shot after shot, only stopping to slam a fresh magazine in before resuming firing. The lead Deimos squads were cut down as they ran for any available cover and tried to push closer with a steely determination. The ASBR and IW-30 fire was being returned by a torrent of red energy rifle fire from the Deimos, who were advancing in coordinated rushes amongst the houses, seemingly immune to the losses that were being inflicted on them. Stalker unclipped a grenade and, leaving its settings to the standard 5 seconds, hurled it at the opposite house. The grenade bounced off a wall and fell behind a fence before it detonated with a crump, the explosion bringing part of the fence crashing down. Stalker took a look around and quickly realized it was time to go, as if they didn't cross the narrow street now, they might get caught by enfilading fire by the Deimos on the flanks. Using hand signals, Stalker signaled the unit commander, who signaled back, "Okay." A Deimos popped around the corner of the building and with a whoosh launched a rocket. The rocket streaked overhead, and for a split second Stalker thought it had missed. Then it detonated. With a loud crack, the rocket's airburst warhead exploded, showering the area with lethal shrapnel. The blast threw Stalker bodily into the masonry low wall he had been using for cover and winded him. With coughing rasps, he fought for breath, and all at once his senses returned, and Stalker gasped in pain. In the EEA's HUD, red warning lights flickered, indicating a penetration of the suit. Strong hands rolled him over, and Stalker looked up into the unreadable face of a commando hidden behind his EEA helmet. "Can you walk?" "Fuck walking. I can run if need be." The commando snapped around and fired a long burst from his ASBR, the noise deafening at close range. Stalker realizing that his suit's acoustic protection systems were down. "I've got you covered, specialist move." Stalker rolled up and, ignoring the pain and sensation of blood trickling down his back, ran across the street, keeping low as bright red bursts whipped around him. Stalker dived headfirst into a window that had been smashed and was occupied by a cavalry fire team, their ISW-90s and IW-30s momentarily falling silent until he cleared their line of fire before they roared once more to life. In the street, the commandos and Terra Nova withdrew to the right, dragging their wounded with them, the cavalrymen providing cover fire as they crossed the street and made it to the relative safety of a half-collapsed civilian house. Stalker landed next to a cavalry lieutenant who was busy on the tack net, and as he quickly checked his weapons and gear, Stalker listened to the officer who seemed oblivious to his arrival as he concentrated on his task. "Hacienda, this is Stallion 3-7. I need immediate fire support at my coordinates. We are heavily engaged. Enemy infantry in the open. Danger close. Say again, we are covered in infantry." "Roger that, Hacienda. Coordinates are the same as previous. Push 100 and fire 1 round. All received. Confirm push 100. Copy, round out." After a moment, there was the distinctive whine of an incoming mortar round followed by an impact some distance behind the opposite line of buildings. "Hacienda, this is Stallion. Drop 50. Say again, drop 50 and fire for effect." "All received, Hacienda. Rounds out." "Rounds out." Just behind the opposite bank of the Rhine, a company of L-96 mortars belonging to the 4th/7th Armored Cavalry Battalion, the 7th Armored Cavalry Division's Mobile Support Battalion, or MSB, began to adjust their tubes down 50 meters. They had dug their mortar pits in a scenic section of parkland close to the massive Theodore Hughes Bridge, the green lawns and gardens now pockmarked by brown pits, each containing an L-96 mortar and his crew. While concealed further back in nearby streets, the company's ammunition carriers waited to dash forward to replace the crew's ready-use stocks. Once the distance was corrected, the crews opened fire, each mortar pumping out a 91mm high explosive, or HE, shell every 5 seconds until their ready-use stockpile of 24 rounds was expended. Stalker kept up his fire as the mortars began to land, first 1 or 2, then in a steady hail, the shells pummeling the streets and houses directly behind the opposite side of the street, the HE rounds sowing chaos in the Deimos rear. Stalker pumped out a 50mm frag grenade to add to the chaos, the round going through a window and detonating inside a building, momentarily silencing the red energy rifle fire that had been coming from within. Using the mortar fire as cover, the last of the friendly forces crossed the gap, leaving the opposite side of the street to the Deimos, only a width of paved road separating the opposing forces. Amazingly, as the mortar fire died off, the volume of fire resumed, just as fiercely as before, and, as if in response to the mortar bombardment, Deimos artillery began to once again pound the UEDF rear areas. With a loud crash, 3's Deimos sliders smashed through a fence between 2 houses, their quad cannons immediately spraying the buildings opposite with a deluge of cannon shells. Stalker rolled flat as the cannon fire swept across the building, the heavy rounds slicing through the building as if it didn't exist, riddling it with fist-size holes. As he looked up, the first thing Stalker saw was a mass of blood spray on the wall, shouting filling the room. A rapid series of cracks echoed across the street, and the lead slider was riddled by a stream of armor-piercing pulse rifle fire, the vehicle losing power and dropping to the ground, smoke issuing from multiple hits. One of the Deimos sliders responded with a missile which streaked back towards the offending Ironhide, but was caught by the IFV's defenses, the missile exploding and showering it with harmless shrapnel, the Ironhide reversing safely out of sight. The remaining two sliders tried to maneuver around the wrecked lead vehicle while still spraying cannon fire, but were enveloped by a barrage of SLAP anti-tank rockets and 50mm heat grenade from the entrenched infantry and were brought to a halt, one exploding spectacularly as the vehicles began to burn furiously. Stalker realized that two of the Cav troopers had been hit, one of the heavy cannon rounds having decapitated an ISW-90 gunner before continuing on to slice through the thigh of a trooper who had been kneeling behind him. Looking ahead, Stalker saw a wave of Deimos coming from behind the now thoroughly wrecked sliders and moving to the left, their bellowing yells carrying clearly over the roar of small arms fire. Their speed was remarkable, and Stalker barely got off two shots before the lead Deimos were across the street and in amongst the buildings. The last of the Deimos were cut to pieces as the defenders reacted to the sudden assault, but at least a dozen had made it across the street and were now in amongst the defenders. As the troopers dragged their dead and wounded comrades away from the window, Stalker quickly checked his ammo and went out the back door. There was yelling and sporadic gunfire coming from the direction the Deimos had penetrated, and Stalker headed towards the sounds, his rifle up and leading the way. The back fence between the two houses had been knocked down by an earlier artillery blast, and Stalker wearily used his rifle to peer around and saw that the back door on the next house had been knocked off its hinges and was lying in the backyard. There was an explosion close by, and the damaged fence shook, a column of smoke beginning to rise from further down the street. There was a blur of movement, and two Deimos sprinted out of the shattered doorway, one of them firing two shots which pierced through the fence, missing Stalker's head by mere inches. As he dropped, Stalker squeezed the trigger on his ASBR, the rifle jumping in his hands as it roared on fully automatic. One Deimos was hit and went sprawling on the lawn. The other didn't slow, and in one jump leapt over the back fence and disappeared from sight. Are you going to pay for that? Stalker picked himself up, and after checking that the fallen Deimos was down for good with a shot to the head, swept into the house. Link felt the Eliminator AMR kick like an angry mule into his shoulder as he picked off another Deimos. The powerful 13.2mm HESH round struck the alien in the neck, and detecting a low-density object, the shaped charge warhead detonated on impact with a spray of green-yellow blood, dropping the alien in mid-stride as it tried to reach cover. Link was shooting from cover back within the room to hide his location from the enemy in the way that all scout snipers have been trained, and the tactic appeared to be working, as despite the stack of empty magazines on the floor, his window had yet to attract any direct enemy fire. From his elevated position, Link had a good view of the furious firefight that was occurring in the street below, the Deimos pressure unrelenting and determined. Link slammed home another one of the heavy magazines and began to search for a new target, zooming in and out with an integrated rifle-mounted thumb control to keep up situational awareness. Just as he zoomed out, a group of Deimos began to move forward, using the wreckage of the three destroyed sliders to keep them covered from enfilading fire. As they ran, they ducked and weaved, and Link had to call upon all of his skill and experience to get off a telling shot. Damn, they're fast. The Eliminator barked, and a Deimos fell mid-stride, tumbling in a heap. A second shot rang out, and another Deimos fell, a spray of grayish matter marking the passage of a headshot. Link searched for another target, but found that they had disappeared. Where the hell did they get to? Link swept area again, but couldn't see any movement. Then a Deimos popped up from behind a wrecked slider, a tube-shaped object in its clawed hands. Link fired, but the Deimos was a split second faster. The rocket left the tube just as its owner was hit in its elongated forehead by a 13.2 millimeters HESH round. Time slowed for Link as the rocket arced up towards the building, and he just had time to throw himself flat as the rocket nicked the window ledge and tumbled into the wall at the back of the room, the blast going off with a terrific thump. Link felt like he'd been crash-tackled by a dozen strong men as he was thrown forward by the power of the blast within the confined space of the room. For a moment, Link lost all perception of time and space and found himself falling. The only thing that he could tell was that he still had a firm grip on his rifle. The free fall came to a sudden and violent end as he impacted the ground, having been thrown completely out of the window and onto the street. Link opened an eye and for a moment thought he was dead. Then slowly consciousness began to filter through the haze. His first sensations were a throbbing pain from his left leg, and that his fingers felt numb and tingled. There was a metallic, salty taste in his mouth, and it took Link's mind a moment to fathom that it was the taste of blood. Slowly he realized that he was lying face down, and that was why it was dark. Then sound began to creep in, distant pops and bangs. Everything seemed distant, like an echo of an already distant echo. Then with a sudden roar, it came crashing back at full volume. The chatter of weapons and detonations of grenades and explosives filling his ears along with a dull background ringing. Link tried to roll over, but a sharp stabbing pain from his ribs caused him to stop halfway, his body spasming with the pain. Hands grasped him, and Link looked up to see a squad of cavalrymen wearing woodland pattern camouflage SBA surrounding him. All had their rifles up and were firing disciplined, well-aimed shots. Two of the men grabbed Link under his arms and began to drag him. Suddenly, he felt tugging at one of his hands. "Specialist, leave it! Drop the bloody rifle!" Something clicked in Link's still confused brain. Someone is trying to take my weapon. And in a surprisingly smooth movement, he drew his Z9 pistol and brought it up into the face of the nearest trooper. The man's face quickly flicked through shock, anger, and then resignation. "All right, keep the bloody thing then. Owens, give me a hand here. Grab his legs. Let's get him out of the street." Suddenly, the air around the group was filled with red energy rifle fire, and before anyone could react, men were falling, their cries of pain and surprise mixing with a chorus of curses and grunts. Link fell to earth as one trooper, holding him, was shot through the chest, and the others switched both hands to their weapons. "I'm hit. Shit. Oh, contact left. Get some fire on those windows." Link rolled over, gritting his teeth against the pain to get a view of what was going on. Most of the cavalrymen were down, and those that weren't hit had gone prone and were firing furiously at a building almost directly behind them in the direction of what should have been friendly forces. Shapes could be seen in the windows and doorways, and red energy fire continued to pour out at the exposed group. Link raised his pistol and shakily opened fire, the dull pop of the silenced weapon lost in the chaos. Stalker glanced around the corner of the hallway. The house was a wreck, the walls peppered with holes and scorch marks. Stalker moved up and found himself at the bottom of the two-story building's stairwell, noise coming from both up the stairs and the main living room on the bottom floor around the corner. For a moment, Stalker thought it might have been friendlies, but then there was a series of low, rumbling voices issued from up the stairs and from down below. The voices were followed by the distinctive sound of Deimos energy rifles firing. Using his rifle camera, Stalker gingerly peered around the corner and saw 4 Deimos downstairs, the bodies of 2 dead cavalrymen on the floor at their feet. Stalker came to a decision and, unclipping a frag grenade, quickly set it to 3-second delay, and then in one movement tossed it and swung around the corner and ran up the stairs. He had just about reached the top of the stairs when the grenade went off with a crump, shrapnel tearing through the already shattered lower level of the building. Stalker had just hit top gear when he reached the top of the stairs and, charging around the corner, found himself confronted with 3 Deimos warriors. All 3 were holding long energy rifles and were busily firing down into the street below. One spun to turn to face Stalker, who, as he brought the ASBR up to his shoulder from the hip, opened up with a burst of automatic fire. At a range of less than 2 meters, the ASBR's 12mm explosive-tipped, smart, caseless ammunition tore into the Deimos warrior. The alien's body armor proving no match for the massive application of point-blank firepower. The alien's riddled body falling in a mist of gore. Stalker swung the still blazing ASBR onto the remaining two, catching one full in the back, the body falling forwards out of the window. The final Deimos, to Stalker's amazement, dived clear. The creature's reflex speed phenomenal. With a click, the ASBR ran dry. On reflex, Stalker threw it at the remaining Deimos, the rifle catching it on the shoulder, knocking the alien's aim off just as it fired a shot from its energy rifle. The round passing as a red streak close enough to Stalker's head to leave a small scorch mark on the side of his EEA helmet. Stalker went for his Z8A pistol with one hand and his combat knife with the other, his fist spikes deploying with a shrill rasp. As he brought the pistol up, Stalker began to squeeze the trigger, desperate to throw the alien's aim off, the rounds thudding into the floor, the last ending up where the Deimos had been as it launched itself clear of the line of fire. As it dived, the Deimos fired its rifle in a blaze of red. By chance, the burst whipped across Stalker's front, one round impacting the slide of the pistol in his hand, knocking it clear and shattering the weapon. Its slide fused and melted. Stalker knew he was running out of options and weapons, so to buy him time to play his final card, he threw his combat knife, the chunky blade flying true and becoming impaled in the alien's hand, the Deimos dropping its energy rifle and roaring with rage. To Stalker's amazement, the Deimos didn't lunge at him or attempt to attack. It just stood its ground and eyeballed him as he drew his sword and fell into a combat stance, the blade feeling impossibly long in the confined space of the room. Stalker stared into the creature's small dark eyes. Outwardly, they seemed lifeless, like a doll's eyes, but behind them Stalker could sense a dark intelligence. Carefully, the Deimos brought its other hand up and drew out the blade, the steel covered in yellow-green blood. Stalker tensed, ready for the attack. But instead, the Deimos slowly raised its arm and pointed the bloody blade at him before, in a blindingly fast thrust, it impaled the blade into the wall at its side up to its hilt. Every sense of Stalker's was running at 200%. He felt alive as he ever had in his life. As the alien stared at him, Stalker knew he had been marked. With a blur, the Deimos warrior lunged, but it wasn't in the direction Stalker had expected. It lunged to the right and smashed clean through the wall and dropped down to the ground below. Stalker stuck his head out the hole behind it and saw it was looking up at him. It raised its injured hand, which was balled into a fist, its bright blood dripping from the knife wound. For another moment, it returned Stalker's shocked stare before it broke contact and disappeared amongst the buildings. Stalker stood entranced in the hole in the wall, looking at the direction it had gone. He did not know if the gesture was a salute or a threat. But one thing was certain, that particular Deimos would remember him. Stalker picked up and reloaded his ASBR, and then carefully headed down the stairs. A quick sweep of the lower level, finding only dead Deimos, the grenade leaving a mess that Stalker was thankful he wasn't going to have to clean up. As he walked out the front door, Stalker saw a bedraggled and bloody group of infantry approaching him and quickly began to lay down cover fire for the group, putting rounds into the windows of the buildings opposite. As they approached, one of them called out, "Thank God for you, specialist. Thought we were all goners that time. Hurry up, get to cover, I've got your 6. As they passed, Stalker saw they were dragging a wounded Terra Nova soldier. It was then he noticed an Eliminator rifle firmly grasped in the wounded man's hand. "Geez, old man, can't you get through one small battle without getting hurt? You're making the 21st look bad." Link grasped Stalker's outstretched hand and pulled himself into a seating position. "Just try to lull the enemy into a false sense of security, boss." Stalker let out a laugh. "Well, you're doing a good job. You look like shit. What the hell happened to you?" "I took a swan dive out of a window. Wasn't a bad effort either. I think I would have got at least an 8.5 for style. The landing was a bit off, though." Stalker was about to reply when there was a fresh explosion and outbreak of small arms fire close by. One of the cavalrymen cautiously leaned out from behind the doorframe and had a look. Further down the street, a fresh, intense firefight had broken out, and both sides were trading close-ranged rocket fire. the buildings and the streets slowly being reduced to rubble. "Can you walk, Link?" "It's just a rib or two. I'm good to go, boss." "Roger that, Link. Just hang 5 while I try to find out what the hell is going on." Sunray 2, this is Alpha 2-1, receiving you 5 by 521. Sit rep over. "We've been hit by armor and infantry, a lot of infantry. Situation tenuous. No sign of mecha yet. Overall received and understood 2-1. Wait out." As he waited, Stalker looked around at the scene around him. The street was a mess. It was strewn with rubble and debris, and here, in their armored vehicles and houses burned. Scattered amongst the wreckage bodies could be seen where they had fallen. The firing, at least in the area occupied by the 21st Company, seemed for the moment to have died off as the Deimos pulled back and regrouped, but further down the line the noise of furious combat was unceasing. Sunray 2 to all units, tornado. Say again, tornado. Stalker's heart sank. That was the withdrawal code. The code could mean only one thing. The Deimos had broken through further up the line, and now the whole line was lost. Despite constant harassing fire, the infantry held their positions as the armor began to move, the remaining vehicles beginning to withdraw a few streets back to where they would halt to wait for the infantry. As the vehicles moved out, so did the walking wounded. Link throwing Stalker a mock salute, as together with a wounded cavalryman, he made his way to the rear. As the line thinned, Stalker found himself holding the line alongside the depleted remnants of Foxtrot 2-1, a cav platoon, and a handful of commandos. Most of the vehicles had left, only a pair of tanks being left behind to cover the intersections until the withdrawal was complete. With the front all but quiet, Stalker found himself looking at the bodies of those who had fallen defending the area he was about to abandon. Men lay where they had fallen, their bodies in the road, along walls, and amongst the rubble of shattered buildings. Stalker knew that many Terra Nova would be included in the final toll. Despite his desire not to leave them for the enemy, Stalker knew there was no time. The living had to take priority over the dead. Still, it grieved Stalker to see so many who had given so much left behind, and he hoped that they would understand and forgive him for what he knew he had to do. The final call came, and all along the stretch of street, smoke grenades were popped, and the units fell back in good order, the Deimos apparently happy to let them go. Stalker was amongst the last to leave, and, after taking one last look, ran to catch up with the others before, after a short jog, he jumped up onto the top of a reversing assassin tank for the ride to the 4th line.